Hi, I'm Karin Hurt, and I'm here with our next edition of Asking for a Friend. And I am delighted to have David Horsager with us today. He is the CEO of the Trust Institute and the author of this brand new book, Trusted Leader. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Karin, it's a treat. Thanks for having me.
So I had to have you on because trust is on everyone's mind right now. And, I have heard you say many, many times, and it comes clear in your book, nothing matters as a business imperative more than trust. Revenue starts with trust. Employee engagement starts with trust. Customer experience starts with trust. That's bold. So I'd love to hear how can you say that?
So this goes back to my grad work, almost 2 decades ago, and everything we do out of the Institute. We put out one of the biggest studies on trust and leadership every year. I hope without any ego, but a whole lot of research and work on 6 continents. We now have, trusted certified coaches on 6 continents, that it is absolutely always a trust issue. And this came out of that research. People weren't talking about trust much that went back when I was doing the research, but trust is always the leading indicator. Everything else lags. As leaders, we look for leading indicators. As an example, it's never a leadership issue. The only reason I follow a leader or not is trust. It's not a sales issue. The only reason I buy or not is trust. It's never a marketing issue. The only way to amplify a marketing message is increase trust in the message. The only way to increase innovation on a team is increase trust so people share ideas. And the only way to, deal with the diversity issues every day. The biggest Harvard study shows diversity on its own can pit people against each other unless you increase trust. Then you get the benefits of diversity, inclusion, equity. The only way to increase learning in a classroom, increase trust in the content, the teacher, or the psychological safety or trust of the room. The problem is, and the reason I wrote that the last book, Trusted Leader, is most people are solving the wrong issue. When they solve for trust, then we've seen tripling sales, attrition going down, retention going up, costs going down. And to speak to how a lack of trust is the biggest expense, think about it. A lock would be a good example without a bunch of deep research. Why do I put a lock on anything? Because of lack of trust, because I don't trust you. So what is the cost of a lack of trust? Well, money, I got to buy the lock, right. But the biggest cost is time. Now I got to open it every time I go through the gate. So what we found is trust was always the leading indicator, and most people are not solving for it. They're talking about engagement or leadership or all these things. And when they solve for trust, then they got strong leadership, more engagement, a higher net promoter score.
Very, very good. It's interesting. I thought I noticed you had this example in this book where you said this senior leader said, "Go out and go tell my people they should trust me."
Yeah, that's what we don't. And there are good reasons not to trust, and one of them is saying, "Just trust me."
Yeah. So you talk about 8 different pillars of how do you do this, and what I love here at Let's Grow Leaders, we're all about practical, and I love that you are really practical in here. Like you say, this is, if you need to build trust, do focus on these 8 things and how they all really integrate. You can't just do one, because if you do one, but you don't do this, that's also going to have an impact.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to hear what are these 8 pillars?
So we have this case for trust. Then we have this 8-pillar framework. And now it's been revalidated by outside universities as the way trust is built globally. They start with the letter C. Don't be confused that there's some motivational framework. They are absolutely research-based, but the C stands for each of the kind of a research funnel. So these are the ways trust is built globally. Doesn't mean we don't contextualize for parts of the world or our work with everything from pro sports teams to corruption issues in East Africa. But here's the 8 very quickly. And then there's a day of work or days of work under each of these. One other thing I said before we get too far on this is we're big on taking research, but making it usable tomorrow morning. So simplifying it. I remember even though as a professor, I'm a farm kid that needs to be able to use that shovel to scoop the manure tomorrow morning. If I can't, it doesn't work, right? So the 8-pillar framework. Number 1 is clarity. People trust the clear and they mistrust or distrust the ambiguous or the overly complex. And most people aren't clear about the right things, even clarity companies, strategic companies. Number 2 is compassion. We trust those that care beyond themselves. So I have a hard time following or being accountable to a leader or someone I don't feel like cares beyond themselves. Number 3 is character. Many people think this is everything. Character is the foundation of trust. It is foundational and it is important. And in fact, don't be deceived into thinking, well, you built all your character by 12 years old, like some psychologist thinks. Many organizations are moving toward higher character away from it. Many people are, in fact, in their sales programs and other things, incentivizing a lack of the character they say they want to have. So there's some frameworks for actually building a high character organization. But it's not everything, because number 4 is competency. For this very reason, I might trust you, Karin, to take my kids to the ball game because of your character, but not give me a root canal because of your competency at that specifically. So you have to stay fresh and relevant and capable. Next pillar is commitment. We trust those that stay committed in the face of adversity. You think of Mandela, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Jesus, or Joan of Arc, and they were trusted partly because they were committed to something beyond themselves. Under this pillar, we find the framework for how you rebuild trust if you've ever lost it. Next pillar is connection, the ability to connect and collaborate. And, each of these pillars in companies have counterforce, and I talk about that in the end of the book. What are the symptoms you might find? One of the symptoms in an organization might be siloing or an unwillingness to share budget or work together. That would be a counterforce to this pillar of connection, collaboration. The next pillar is contribution. Really, the number one word that came out of this research funnel would be results. We trust results. You can't just have compassion and character. You got to contribute results, right? So outcomes, performance, contributing results. It's very important. So that surgeon might be a great surgeon, but I go in for amputation and they cut off the wrong leg. We got a problem because I didn't get the result I expected or asked for. And the final pillar is consistency. We call this the queen and king of the pillars because we are trusted for whatever we do consistently. If you're late all the time, I will in fact trust you to be late. Consistency is trusted. And so that's the 8. They all work together. It's really important to see how you really can solve against these, why it's not an engagement issue. It's not, even people say, you like C words, David. Isn't it ever a communication issue? It never is. Communication's happening all the time. Clear communication is trusted. Unclear isn't. High character is, low character isn't, consistent is, inconsistent isn't. So when we solve against these, we actually solve the root issue. And that's what we're about. That's the 8-pillar framework. And there's a whole lot of ways we use these pillars to solve the real issue.
Oh, that's fantastic. I really, as I was reading your book, it was so consistent with some of the work that we do, the clarity. You have to be clear about where you're headed, and it can't be about 18 things, because now it's hard. And I hadn't thought about that as a trust issue. But when I know exactly where we're going, that gives me confidence in that leader, in the direction. I feel like I can attach myself to that. So that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. So if you're just joining us, we are here with David Horsager, and he is talking about how do you build trust based on his new book. We would love to entertain your questions. We're going to dig into a couple of these 8 pillars in a little more depth. We also do have our first question, so we'll take a minute and answer that one. This is from Weston Davis, and he said, "Could this be likened to a romantic relationship?" What would you? I know you have an answer to that in the book here, so I'd love to hear that one.
Well, let's see. I want to see that question well. So, first of all, always the number one question everybody's asking about you, Weston, or anybody, whether it's your kids, your romantic partner, your customers, or your clients, is not actually, do I like you? We think it's all about like. We buy from people like, that's not true. I've got friends I like a lot. I wouldn't go to business with in a million years because I don't trust them. The question everybody's actually asking about you is, can I trust you? Can I trust you? Now, in the way we talk about trust, you'll almost always be liked, but absolutely it can be likened to a romantic relationship in certain ways. But actually, I would say in deeper ways. Like sometimes romantic is just a quick, like in almost, I would want almost a lasting romantic relationship is what I would liken to it, as far as when you bring trust into it. So, this is fun. I'll say this. So one time I did this event. A year later, I just remember them because they were in Hawaii for this sales team, and the winners that sold $1 million or more would always get to go to this Hawaii trip. And I was the speaker for several years in a row. And so I spoke this one year. I came back the next year, and this burly, tough guy came up to me a year later with tears in his eyes. He won the trip again, and he said, that trust stuff you taught last year, it was so powerful. I thought it would help my sales, and actually, I just want to tell you it helped me triple my sales, but way more important, and he has tears streaming down, it saved my marriage.
Oh.
And that's how you can apply this to marriage, to family. In fact, you'll see in my first book, Trust Edge, I even say, how do you apply these pillars to, being a parent or marriage or life, because we know this, organizations don't change, right? They never change. Individuals do. But when an individual does, then a team, a company, even a country can change. So one more comment actually for the romantic is, try to think about what you can do, not what they can do. So this is, as you know, and whether you're a company or not, I don't know if you've been doing this yet, but I was speaking at live events a lot of times. Yesterday, 2 days ago, I was in Kansas City, a few hundred people, signing books at the back. It's kind of fun to be back live.
It's good to be back.
A lot of times I'll have people coming back and backstage and like, I love that trust of when I'm signing books. I love that trust. It's so true. I believe it. I agree with it. My boss need to be here. My spouse, my teenagers need this stuff. They should have been here. It's like, they're not here. You're here. What can you do about it, right?
So, David, we have a word for that around here called the Sasserant syndrome. And that stands for so-and-so really needs this, right? And, in any leadership development, you have more credibility, more trust if you're actually doing it and people see you're doing it and say, why are you getting those results? And then you can share, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've got a big question in, but I'm going to come back to this one. But I just wanted to acknowledge that I saw about why do we have problems trusting our politicians these days? I'm not going to ask that one yet, but I am going to ask it before we end. But I do want to ask you, which of these pillars, are there some that are more important than others? Like, what are your favorites?
Well, first of all, it's interesting because they all work together. You could say, well, I've got a clarity issue or I'm really clear. I share the vision at the annual meeting. And yet, because you don't share it every 14 days consistency, you lost clarity. Or you could say, well, we got a commitment issue. It might be directly a commitment issue, but because people don't feel compassion or cared about, they're losing commitment on their teams. So they can all work together. They're all important. Of course, if I'm talking about a babysitter of my kids, I really want high character. Whereas if I'm on the airplane, I don't know if I care so much about compassion, but they better be competent as far as a pilot. So there's certain ways that I might want a little more or less, but in the way we talk about being a trusted leader, you actually do need all 8. And yet I might favor some over others in certain situations, certainly. But if I was going to take it and recommend to people out there, think about, hey, what if you're even without we assess trust. We have 6 ways we measure it. We help people, close gaps. But just writing these 8 on a napkin and put them on your desk and saying, hey, what are we doing well? We're showing compassion well. We're doing this well. What one of these, if we worked on this for the next 90 days, would really help us with that client or with our own team? And just pick one. If you don't know where to pick, then you can always circle clarity, because there's something you can do, as you know, to drive more clarity. And the good thing about clarity compared to character or commitment is you can see changes and impact in 2 weeks. Character might be harder to change.
Very good. Thank you. I really liked your comment. It says, it's not enough to be a trustworthy person. You must build a trustworthy business. And I see that a lot. The leader, the CEO, trustworthy person. And yet there are some of these 8 pillars are wonky. And the business is not doing well. I can think of some very specific examples right in my mind that pop up when I read that. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Well, in my, because I believe in this so passionately, there's people that can be, like you said, trustworthy, and they think trustworthy simply is, just high character or something. These all 8 feed into the trust you need as a leader and certainly as an organization. And you'll see in the book, Ethan, in the first part of the book in the story, like, he's trustworthy, he's got high character and whatnot, but he's not trusted by his team. And it's for things that were blind spots to him, So there's, I've gone into organizations with like maybe a great leader, but they're not hiring based on trust. They're not, I saw an organization lose an enormous amount of trust as an organization because actually they weren't letting people go in a based on a trustworthy way. Doesn't mean you don't have to let people go. I mean, frankly, in this pandemic, I watched a CEO of a big company that you would know let go 2,000 people and actually gain trust in the way he did it. So, when culturally, you have to align your activities with these 8. And that's why an organization can lose, because you haven't built frameworks based on trust, from hiring to culture to sales to whatever.
Yeah. So you brought up the pandemic, and in the pre-show, we were talking a bit about this. I am really curious because during times of crisis, that is really where trust is built or lost more quickly than normal. And so I'm curious, in the organizations that you've seen, what are the behaviors that the companies who increased their trust during this time, what did they do?
Well, a few things they did, and this is really important for people to hear. Your fastest opportunity to build trust is not in first interaction like people often think. First interaction is good, but your fastest opportunity is in crisis. When people are throwing clipboards in boardrooms and swearing at you, when a customer is mad, you can have an incredible opportunity to increase trust faster than ever when people are actually in crisis. And some people built an enormous amount of trust fast in the midst of the pandemic, and some people lost a whole lot fast. So what are a few things I saw? I mean, there's so many things, everything from practical. One hospital here, the biggest emergency room hospital, that they had to go right away into the nurses had to be in hazmat suits, and they've got kids, 4-year-olds, let's say, come in for shots, and it's like seeing a terrible, scary clown. They wouldn't take their shot because all of a sudden that nurse that they used to see the smile they couldn't see it. And so quickly, they made these big buttons with the nurse picture of the nurse smiling, put it on the hazmat suit. And when the 4-year-old would come in, they'd say, "Now remember, this is me." "Oh yeah." And they would take the shot even while wearing the hazmat suit. So they built the compassion or connection pillar using something very practical. Other things that people did, senior leaders. I mean, what we saw is an increase in humanization. Senior leaders that stayed, perfect, produced, lost trust. Those that let the cat jump on the keyboard and had the 4-year-old running in their undies behind them when they shared, all of a sudden there was an increase in trust because they're like me. They're not up in the ivory tower. They're working from their home like I am. Those leaders that understood that many of their people were not in the 7-bedroom home on the golf course, and understood that many of their employees were working in an apartment building, in an apartment, 3 kids running around home from school, and they're trying to do their work at the kitchen table, and the husband has COVID. I mean, those that could put their feet in those shoes, that helped a lot. Those a couple really practical ideas. Let's take the clarity pillar. Those that did well. Here's one example I saw. A company where they said, okay, instead of 3 priorities, and I agree with Collins, who says if you have more than 3 priorities, you don't have any. In crisis, you even have to pull that down. And they said, hey, to get through this, here's our 1 core priority. This is where we're all going to be focused on this. Okay. And then they also shortened up the time frame. I was fortunate to be on a call with Stanley McChrystal. You'll remember he was in the turn for the worst of the Afghan war. He was put in charge of joint forces. And he said, we were having so much trouble getting intel, so much trouble. And he said, basically, I stopped and said, we're going to meet every day. Instead of having a priority for the week, for the year, for the month, every single day. So at 0600 his time, he put 2,200 people from around Europe and Asia on a call for 30 minutes, and they came up with a plan for the day. In times of crisis, you talk about clarity, you got to shorten it and narrow it, both. And so like 1 key for the day. One other example, not to stay with the Army idea, but here's a takeaway for everybody. I asked one CEO that I work with, and he also went through the War College in the 1980s, and he said, here's one thing that's working for me, and I knew he was leading well in the midst of crisis. He said, one thing we learned in the War College was VUCA, V-U-C-A. In times of you've heard this, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, we asked 2 questions. He said, we asked, number 1, what can we control? And number 2, what should we do first? And I think what I saw as leaders I walked with that didn't do well, thought of all kinds of things like, well, is it going to be Trump or Biden? Oh, I don't understand the surroundings, but they spent all their brain calories on things they could not control. Oh, I can't do the PPP loan. That's blah, this is that. And those that took their head out of the sand and said, well, but all of this, what can I control? They learned there was a whole lot more they could control, and then narrow it down to, and of all those things, what's the thing I should do today? They did well in the midst of crisis, and they built trust.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much. So that's so aligned with what we teach. So if your most important thing, how do you really stay focused on your strategic most important thing, your short-term initiatives, most important things, and then daily, what is your most important thing you must do today? Okay.
Absolutely.
So David, we have a lot of questions coming in. So this is
So I
fantastic.
don't see them if I'm supposed to,
I'm
because
gonna
in my chat I don't see them. So tell
so
me if
go to
there they are.
we're gonna pull.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
All right,
And
there
I'm
we go.
gonna
Just
pull
tell
them
me
up.
what they are.
So yeah, so I want to start, Jared. I'd like to start with Dave Gregory's question. And so can you pop that one up? So Dave Gregory says, is contribution giving back to others or contributing more to the organization? So what do you mean by that? And he's already ordered the book, so you got one sale.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Dave Gregory is a great strategic partner of ours. So we
Thank you.
partner with them on a lot of things.
Wonderful. Well,
So.
and Dave, if you want some free resources, just reach out. Trustedge.com or Allison at trustedge.com with one L, and we'll give you some other free stuff. But basically, the key words that came out of that research funnel were results, performance, outcomes. So that what the overall meaning is, contribution is two ways, and we call it the two sides of contribution. One is, how do I get the most results? How do I get the most results for my organization, for my team? And as a leader, there is the second side is, how do I motivate results in others? So it's all about results. So it could be me, in a company, it is getting results for for your organization, for your team. So it is, we call it the M&Ms. How do I maximize contributing results as a leader, and how do I motivate others? And there's a few strategies under each. Frankly, my book, I don't know where it is, but The Daily Edge was all about how do I maximize results, 33 ways that I do that. And then you'll see in this book, the 6 E's for motivating results in others. But it's all about results. We are trusted because of our results. We can't just have compassion and character. On the other hand, we've seen companies get a whole lot of results for a time and not have compassion or character and lose everything. So you have to have all 8.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Okay, let's get a couple more here. So Leah is asking about cultural differences in building trust in global projects.
Absolutely. A great question. Here's what we found with the 8-pillar framework. Number 1, without ego, but a whole lot of research, the 8 work around the world. These are the 8 ways trust is built globally. However, we contextualize, just like, let's start simple in just with what does it mean to different people. So let's take simple. The clarity pillar is deeper than this, but let's just take it simple. Clarity of vision might be really important for a leader to have, right? So the most important clarity for a manager might be expectations, like they could be trusted or not based on clear expectations. A salesperson might be losing because they're clear about how cool they are, how long they've been in business, how all this, but they're not clear about the benefits of the product to me, so nobody's buying. The teacher, we've got a teacher over here. They have compassion, they have character, but everybody hates the teacher. Why? Because that teacher is unclear about the assignments, so the kids go home frustrated every day because they're unclear about the assignment. In every one of those contexts, it was a clarity issue, but different, right? Mm-hmm. Now let's take this global. So in global, and I'm trying to do this quickly because I know we don't have a whole lot of time, and I'm passionate about this, and I'm going to, I could give you so much research and everything else, but let context globally. So we work with, corruption issues in East Africa. We worked with the Colorado, the Yankees, the pro sports teams. We got certified coaches on 6 continents doing this work, and everything from helping girls rebuild trust after sex trafficking to, oil and banking executives. So it's broadly used, and it works. But how we use it, 2 levels down from each pillar, is where we especially need to contextualize. So as an example, compassion pillar. Everywhere in the world, people that feel cared about, it's a part of being trusted. Okay. Now, 1 level down, how do I show compassion in the workplace? We call it the laws of compassion. LAWS is listen, appreciate, wake up and be present, and serve selflessly. So let's take listening. So we know listening shows compassion that builds trust globally. 1 level down, everywhere in the world. 1 more level down, 2 levels down from the pillar, we might need to contextualize. As an example, in the US, the most trusted way to listen to someone generally is looking them in the eye. However, in a certain part of the Middle East, the most trusted way to listen, that shows compassion, that builds trust, might be to not look someone in the eye while listening to them. So it is important to contextualize. And in the first book, I even talk about how you can amplify these pillars globally, and you might need to. So, but that's an example. So yes, please contextualize for your space. And of course, we help people do that. But context does matter.
Thank you so much. I have to come back to the politics question. So I gave you some time to think about one because that was probably the toughest one. Why do we have problems trusting our politicians these days?
Well, I'll tell you a couple of things really quick. Number one, thank you for not introducing me this way. Many people have, because some people know I've spoken to U.S. Congress a couple times on trust. And so some people introduced me, and he's even spoken to our own U.S. Congress on trust. Obviously, he's not very good, right? So let me just say a couple. One reason people don't trust politicians is because we are incentivizing a lack of trust. Some of our, we're incentivizing in a couple ways. Media is incentivized to get eyeballs. And in fact, social media incentivizes when you start watching one type of social media, then the algorithms are set up so that you keep getting that type, and you in fact feed your, let's say, anti-vax or pro-vax perspective, because you keep getting, well, look, everybody's saying this because you see a limited perspective. We're incentivizing that. Unfortunately, our government is incentivizing. You saw it happen very recently here with something that happened in Wyoming, where a separate voice was stripped of her leadership because she had a different view and wanted to, in essence, work across the aisles. So there's several other ways we're de-incentivizing trust. Now, let me, another thing that's happened in our government compared to 50 years ago, 100 years ago, is 100 years ago, the Democrat and Republican from California, after doing their work on the Senate floor, would ride the train back together to California. They'd hang out, they'd have a beer together. 100 years ago, 50 years ago only, after debating it out on the Senate floor, they're stuck in Washington together, they're away from their families, they'd go have dinner together, Democrats and Republicans. Now, there is such a push from a freshman senator to, in fact, raise money that from the first day in, they're sleeping, in some cases, they're sleeping on their office floor, and they're raising money, and they're not meeting together outside the Senate floor, which of course strips this humanization and so forth. There's a whole lot of policies I could talk about that are doing this, but let me say one thing that might be interesting to some, and that is, unfortunately, institutional trust has tanked since Watergate. And Watergate, about 80%, right before that, 80% of Americans trusted our government to do what's best for our country. Now it's less than 7%. And the research shows we used to have kind of a bell curve of views. Okay, I'm a little bit more Democrat, Republican, kind of moderate. Now it's a barbell. Way over here, way over here. It's there's a whole lot of other things we could say about that, and I'd love to, but I want to honor you.
Yeah, we're almost out of time. I thank you so much. I have to ask about, before we close, about virtual teams and hybrid teams, and this you're bringing people back, and what should be top of mind when you're around trust right now in this virtual and hybrid environment?
Okay, so there's I wrote an article on this. Maybe you can, if you want to go deeper on it, I don't know if it was the one I wrote for Forbes or CEO World or what, but it's not too long ago that I wrote about this. A couple things to think about in our short time together. There's unfairness on both sides. On one side, there's employees saying, well, just trust me. I'm gonna, if you trust me more, I do better. And yet it's not always true. There's people that then start doing their laundry and go on vacation when they're supposed to be working. On the other side, there's too much demands from people. So one way to think about it is, in more virtual worlds, one thing that helps both sides is incentivization based on results. Instead of time working, if you can change, and not just salespeople, almost everyone can be incentivized by results. So if you can say, hey, show that you made these 10 calls a day, show that you got this done, and take the time equation out of it and pay based on results, that's one quick, simple idea. And I'm watching your time go. So, I can talk about this whole just topic for a long time, but I'm happy to give more, but that's one idea. Think of incentivizing results. And, number two, if you can add more connection and communication in a virtual environment, there is something still about human to human. It does matter. It is critical. And whether that's virtually meeting or that is creating some in person, we see actually results go up.
Thank you. So what I'll do is I'll find that article and I'll put it in the link in the comments after the show. So I want to thank you so very much. This was a fantastic conversation. You packed a lot in a half an hour. So do you have one last piece of advice to close?
Well, maybe two.
Okay.
One is the research shows the number one reason people work for an organization last year. Number one motivator was not pay, was not more autonomy, was not a fun work environment with a ping pong table. The number one request of employees was they wanted to work where there was trusted leadership. That trusted leadership matters. Number two, I'll say this under the last pillar, which is consistency, and it is this. It is the little things done consistently that make the biggest difference as far as trust or anything. I'm not overweight because I ate too much this morning for breakfast. It would be for years of having ice cream. I'm not a good leader for sharing the vision one time. I'm a good leader for sharing the vision every 14 days. I'm not a good leader for appreciating people with a plaque at the annual meeting. I'm a good leader for appreciating my team consistently. Little things done consistently make the biggest difference, whether it's with your spouse, friend, partner, customer.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Again, David's book, Trusted Leader. Delighted to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing this message we're passionate about.